Welcome to Car Sales Talk 101, where it's all about life in the car business. Telling you like it is. Here's the man with the plan, Terry Cameron. Let's get started.
Welcome back to Car Sales Talk 101. I'm Terry Cameron. Last week, I had a salesperson tell me that I don't understand what they're going through on the sales floor. It's not the same as when I sold cars. And I thought about that a little bit, and I thought, well, you know what? He's right. And then I started to think about what else has changed since I've been on the sales floor. Maybe I don't understand, or maybe I do. You remember when you were a kid, and you tried to tell a story to your mom and dad to get out of a predicament, and they told you, don't even give that to me. I've heard everything before. Even though you came up with the greatest story ever, you knew that they didn't think of anything like that before, or hear of anything like that before. And now that you're of age, you have kids, and they do the same thing. So it's just like when I started selling cars. I remember telling my sales manager about why I didn't touch desk, why the customer didn't buy, and he just didn't understand. And then I became a sales manager years later, and I heard the same things from all my salespeople. And they were the excuses and reasons that I thought were mine. I owned them. Nobody else knew anything about them. Again, he said things weren't the same, and I decided to go back and reminisce a little bit. So let's talk about what's a little bit different from what it used to be when I sold cars. Now, I'm talking about in the early to late 90s. First thing I want to talk about is training. What kind of training did you have? What kind of training do you have? What kind of training did we have back then? Especially product training. What we do now for product training, and a lot of sales training, is Google it. There's all kind of YouTube videos. The manufacturers have training videos and courses to help us learn more about our customer and our product. But back when I sold cars, we had product brochures. We actually had to take the brochure out to the car, walk around it, read it, sit inside it, and learn about it ourselves. And you know what? Real salespeople, that's what they excel in. They need to touch and feel things. They actually have to go through it. In the Army, we called it OJT, on-the-job training. We didn't have the videos. And I want you to think about this. If there weren't YouTube videos or anything else out there, there wasn't internet back then, what did your customers do to school themselves on the car or truck or SUV they wanted to come out and buy? That's right, they had to come to the dealership and do the exact same thing you did. Grab a brochure and touch and feel that car. The other thing that I think about back then was our bell-to-bell attitude. You worked every day, bell to bell. One thing that stands out in my mind is the last week of the month. It was all hands on deck. Nobody took a day off. Whether you were on pace for a record month or a piss-poor month, everybody worked the last week of the month. Boy, if I threw that out right now to my sales floor, I'd have a mutiny. Now we have shifts. Some people come in early, some people come in late, and they only work probably about 50 to 60 hours a week. Again, back then it was bell to bell, and 70, 75 hours a week was not out of the question. There weren't any sick days. I mean, if you called in sick, guess what? You just lost a vacation day. And God forbid, if you called in sick on a Monday, a Saturday, or the day after your day off. I remember when the internet came out, when everything was available to our consumers. I think it was first the credit union started it, where they would give the customer their idea of what invoice was on a new car and what trade value was on a pre-owned car. And for the most part, they were really close. But because it wasn't in writing, it wasn't on the screen, we had a way to defend ourselves. Well, all hell broke loose. The internet came about, and people knew exactly what we paid for our cars. They knew exactly how much markup we had. They knew exactly how much their trade-in was worth, or at least very close to it. And we absolutely hated it. You know, we didn't have to have those customers walk on the lot with an NADA book that's 3, 4, 5, 6 months old taking notes. They already have it on the internet. So we hated that. They knew everything. Also, before the internet came out, our customers shopped 6 to 7 dealerships physically. They actually had to go there and touch and feel that car. Now they only shop 1.2 to 1.5 because they've done all their research online. And I don't mean just a couple of them. I'm talking 90% plus do their research on the car, your dealership, and their trade-in before they even come on the lot, which means they came here to buy the car. The internet came about. We hated it. We lost a lot of good salespeople for it. But guess what? At least now we know when the customer shows up, they're here to buy. We don't have to wonder if we're number 1 or number 6 on their shopping tour. They're here to buy the car now. And if we don't treat them that way, they're not going to buy the car. But if we assume the sale, we don't pay attention to all the negative things they say, like I'm not buying now. I have to wait till I get my insurance check. I have to wait till I close on my house. I have to wait for my daughter to graduate from high school. And I have to wait for the cow to jump over the moon. When you buy into that stuff, a sale is made, but you're the one that was sold. So there was no internet then. We loved it. We hated it when it came about. And now we love it again. Prospecting. Wow, what a big difference it is today. What do we have now to prospect? Okay, we have email. We have cell phones. We have caller ID, so if a customer does call us, we can call them back. We have the dealership spending more money than ever on advertising. We have websites that have all of our cars, and we have ways of finding out who was at our website. We have CRMs. We have a way to keep track of all of our customers and schedule it to remind us to follow up with them. What about videos? How powerful is that to be able to send your customer a video of the car that they're interested in and you talking about it? Let's back up a few years. Prospecting was done on foot, on the phone, no emails, nothing else. You either drove to a neighborhood and did some prospecting, you asked for referrals and called them, or you cold called from the phone book. Sounds like lots of fun, doesn't it? Here's a quick story. I sold cars just outside Fort Hood, Texas. And I got a little voice activated recorder that I put in my pocket. And I would drive on Fort Hood. Now, of course, this is before 9/11. You can't do that anymore. But I would drive on the Fort Hood, and everybody's government quarters that they lived in had their last name and the rank right above the door. So I would go down the street and find Moore Street. And I would just read off the addresses. 515-1, Staff Sergeant Johnson. 55-2, Sergeant First Class Bob. Whatever it is. And then I'd go back home, open up my phone book, look for those names on that street. Then I would call them, no caller ID, just to make sure somebody answered the phone and it was still a good number. And then here's the hard part that people can't even imagine doing now. But I would type up letters and send them to the customer, introducing myself. And even more amazing than that is I would follow up a couple days later with a phone call. And it was so simple. Did you get the letter that I sent you? Or did it end up in the trash with the rest of the junk mail? Well, I just wanted to call and introduce myself. And I sold cars that way. I sold lots of cars that way. I told everybody what I did, where I did it at. I sold cars that way. Okay, let's talk about gross. I'll admit, back in the day, there was much more gross in a car deal. I remember selling Jeep Grand Cherokees on a balloon payment, a 24-month balloon payment, giving the customer about $3,500 in rebate, getting their payments very low, and still end up with a 3 or 4 pounder. They were the good old days. So yeah, gross was more prevalent then. We made a lot more money per car back then. But we're selling a lot more cars now than we were back then. We're doing a lot less work to get the same amount of sales. Now, if we put our effort in to all the things we just talked about, your product training, your sales training, your prospecting, your following up, if we put all that effort into it, who cares what the gross is? You're going to sell a lot of cars and you're going to make a lot of money. So yes, it is different than when I sold cars. But it's not necessarily worse. It may not even be better. But that's what it is now. And a good salesperson knows how to adapt. And a good salesperson sells cars based upon their work. They're management driven. They manage their business. The poor salespeople are market driven. They depend on the dealership's advertising, the manufacturer's advertising, walk-in traffic. So if it's raining and storming and snowing outside, what are we doing? Exactly. Guys, things aren't the same as they used to be. But I think it's easier to sell a car right now. The customer that's coming on your lot now is much more qualified than they were before, and you know much more about them. You have to know that they came to buy a car today. Here's a thought. If the dealership spends about $200, $250 per car for advertising to get that customer on the lot for you to talk to them, and if you don't sell them a car, don't you think it's fair to pay the dealership back that $200, $250? Well, if that were the rules, we wouldn't have any salespeople. So all the dealer asks you, all I ask of my salespeople is that if we're spending this money to get them in here, all we ask is that you give it 100%. And if you don't sell them a car, oh well. As long as you give them 100%, because we know if you give them 100% of the process to 100% of the people, 100% of the time, we're all going to be successful. So times have changed, but I think they're better. And because of that, the sky's the limit. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please rate it and write a review on Apple Podcast. We appreciate your valuable feedback. You can email Terry at 10minutessalestalk@hot.rr.com. And don't forget to share the show with a friend.